The phone rang at 2:03 a.m. sharp, a sound that sliced through the silence of my bedroom like a knife. I had always feared late-night calls. They never bring good news. My name is Clara Caldwell. I am 67 years old. And that call marked the moment my entire life split into a before and an after. I remember fumbling for the receiver, my hands shaking. A voice I did not know spoke quickly. "Mrs. Caldwell, this is Mercy Hospital. Your husband Henry suffered a cardiac arrest in his study. You need to come immediately." I didn't think. I pulled on the first coat I could reach, Henry's old wool coat that still hung by the door, and drove through the empty streets with my nightgown sticking to my skin from sweat and fear. The hospital lights blinded me as I ran inside, but when I got there, it was already too late. Henry, my husband of 50 years, the man who had been my anchor and my compass, was gone. People tell you the world stops when you lose someone. For me, it did not stop. It spun faster, crueler. I heard myself scream without sound, like the air had been stolen from me. I clutched Henry's coat tighter around me, as if the threads could stitch my heart back together. Henry was a good man. He worked as an engineer turned real estate investor, steady and quiet, the kind of man who never forgot to kiss my cheek before leaving for work. Every morning he brewed my coffee before I even opened my eyes. He had this habit of leaving little notes on the counter, crooked handwriting ink smudged, sometimes saying things like, "Clara, you are my forever," or simply, "I love you." I kept every single one in a box by the bed. That night after his death, I held one in my hand until my knuckles went white. At the hospital, they spoke of paperwork, of arrangements of what would come next, but I could only think of what had just ended. My son Michael arrived later that morning with his wife Vanessa. My son looked broken, his face, pale shoulders hunched, as if the weight of losing his father pressed him down into the ground. But Vanessa, she came in with her perfect hair and flawless nails, sunglasses perched atop her head, though the sky outside was gray. She wept, yes, but not like a grieving daughter-in-law. Her tears felt measured, her hands squeezing mine for display more than comfort. I felt her fingers slack in the moment no one was watching. In those hours of grief, I noticed something that others didn't. Vanessa's eyes scanned the waiting room, not at the clock, not at the floor, but at the man in a sleek suit sitting 2 chairs away, a real estate developer named Richard Harlow. Their brief glance, their whispered exchange, carved a suspicion deep inside me. The morning of the funeral came with rain, not a downpour, but a steady cold drizzle that soaked through coats and umbrellas as if the sky itself was weeping for Henry. I stood beneath the black canopy outside the church, the wool coat clinging to my shoulders, Henry's coat the one I had pulled on the night he died. The scent of him still lingered faintly in the fabric, mixing with the damp air. Friends, neighbors, and distant relatives filled the pews, their faces blurred through my veil of grief. My son Michael walked stiffly at my side, his face hollow, his eyes downcast. He looked younger than his 40 years, as though he had been stripped of his strength the moment his father's heart gave out. I reached for his hand, but he pulled it away too quickly, adjusting his tie instead. Grief had built walls around him, walls I could not yet cross. Vanessa arrived in a sleek black dress, her hair styled in perfect waves that did not move in the wind, her nails freshly polished a pale pink. She wore oversized sunglasses, though the rain and clouds made them unnecessary. She clutched tissues, dabbing delicately at her cheeks. To anyone watching, she looked like the picture of a grieving daughter-in-law. But I saw what others did not. Her tears were timed a sob, just as someone turned their head, a trembling hand at the precise moment eyes were upon her. When no one looked, her face flattened, her lips pressed tight with calculation. I felt the chill of it. Grief is messy, raw, unshaped. Hers was rehearsed, and it unsettled me. During the service, I sat in the front row, my grandson Aaron pressed against my side. He was 8 years old, Henry's pride and joy, a boy with a mop of sandy hair and eyes too innocent to understand the finality of death. As the choir sang, he leaned into me and whispered, "Grandma, is Grandpa still making pancakes on Saturday?" He promised he would. The words pierced me deeper than any hymn. My throat closed, but I forced myself to smile softly, brushing his hair back. "No, sweetheart, Grandpa can't make them anymore." but I will. They won't taste the same, but you will still have pancakes on Saturday." His little head nodded satisfied, and he returned to drawing circles in the damp fog of the church window. In that moment, I realized Aaron was the mirror. His innocence reflected what was real, what was missing, what could not be faked. Henry's absence was written in his small question, a truth no adult could disguise. As the casket was lowered into the ground, Vanessa positioned herself near the center of the crowd. Her sobs grew louder, her body trembling just enough to draw attention. I noticed her glancing sideways more than once, not at Michael, not at the coffin, but at a tall man standing a few yards away. He was dressed in a tailored gray suit, carrying an umbrella no one else shared. I did not recognize him, but the way Vanessa's eyes lingered on him, the subtle lift of her chin, told me they were not strangers. Later, as mourners offered their condolences, I overheard a whisper from a neighbor. "That's Richard Harlow, the developer from the city. Strange for him to be here, isn't it?" I filed the name away in my mind, though my heart already knew it mattered. Michael. Poor Michael drifted through the day like a ghost. He accepted handshakes, received hollow words of comfort, but I could see he was lost untethered. When he finally sat down at the reception, Vanessa guided him with a gentle hand on his shoulder, her face etched in practiced concern. But as she leaned close, her eyes flicked again toward Richard, and a fleeting smile touched her lips before vanishing behind another tissue. I stood at the edge of the room, holding a paper plate of untouched food, and watched. My grief was real heavy, suffocating. Hers was a costume she wore well. I knew Henry had suspected something before he died, but I had not wanted to believe it. Standing there listening to the rain drum against the windows, I began to see clearly what he must have seen too. Aaron tugged at my hand. "Grandma, can we go home now? I'm cold." His small voice pulled me back to the present. I bent to kiss the top of his head, my heart tightening. "Yes, sweetheart. We'll go home soon." As I looked around the room at my broken son, at my calculating daughter-in-law, and at the mysterious man in the gray suit, I felt a strange clarity rise through my sorrow. Something was wrong. Something was unfolding right in front of me. In the drizzle outside, as umbrellas bobbed away and the graveyard filled with puddles, I promised myself I would keep my silence. But I also promised I would not close my eyes, because sometimes the quietest witness sees the most. 3 days after the funeral, I received a call from Henry's attorney, Mr. Dalton. He had been Henry's friend for nearly 30 years, a man of steady voice and measured tone. "Clara," he said, "it's time we read the will. I know you are grieving, but it cannot wait." The next morning I dressed in a simple navy dress and wore Henry's coat once again. I felt him close when I wore it, as though his arms still encircled me. Michael drove us downtown silent the entire ride. Vanessa sat in the back seat, scrolling her phone, sighing loudly, as if the traffic itself were an insult to her grief. Aaron stayed with a neighbor too young to sit through such proceedings. Dalton's office smelled faintly of leather and old books. He gestured for us to sit at the polished oak table. Papers were stacked neatly before him, a sealed envelope resting on top. "This is Henry's last will and testament," he began, adjusting his glasses, "dated 3 months prior to his passing." I folded my hands in my lap, my heart pounding. Henry had told me nothing before his death, but something in Dalton's tone told me this would not be simple. He cleared his throat. "To my beloved wife, Clara Caldwell, I leave all 12 rental properties currently under our portfolio, as well as the Caldwell Shopping Plaza and all stocks held in my investment accounts." The room froze. Michael's head snapped toward Dalton, his eyes wide. "All of it to my mother." His voice cracked, disbelieving. Vanessa's sunglasses slid down her nose, revealing eyes that burned hotter than the rain outside. "That's absurd. We've lived in one of those homes for over a decade. Michael deserves his share. This must be a mistake." Dalton's voice remained steady. "There is no mistake. Your husband was thorough, Mrs. Caldwell. Every line is in proper order, witnessed, notarized, legally binding." Vanessa leaned forward, her hands clawing at the table. "This is theft. My husband is Henry's only son. How dare he cut us out?" Michael's voice trembled. "Mom, why didn't Dad tell me? Why didn't he say anything?" His eyes met mine, desperate, searching for answers. I felt the weight of every gaze pressing down on me. In that moment, I could have spoken. I could have defended Henry's choice, explained his fears, his suspicions. But I remembered his handwriting, the words etched in the letter I had already found in his desk drawer, but had not yet read aloud to anyone. Stay silent. Stay steady. The paperwork will shield you. Patience will be your weapon. So I said nothing. Silence can be louder than any scream. I simply folded my hands more tightly, my face calm, my eyes steady. My stillness unsettled Vanessa more than words ever could. She shifted in her seat, her mouth twisting because anger cannot fight against quiet certainty. Dalton continued reading. To my son Michael, I leave my personal library and my collection of tools from the workshop. May they remind him of the value of knowledge and of building something with his own hands. Michael's mouth opened, then closed again. His grief twisted into confusion, then shame. He slumped back in his chair, avoiding my gaze. Vanessa nearly leapt to her feet. Books tools while she gets millions in real estate and stocks numb. This will not stand. I will contest this. Dalton placed his palms flat on the table. You are free to contest Mrs. Michael Caldwell, but Henry was meticulous. The court will see his intention clearly. She glared at me as though I were the architect of her misfortune. Her words spat like venom. You think you've won, don't you, Clara? Sitting there so smug, letting Henry hand you everything. But this isn't over. I met her stare, unblinking. And still I said nothing. The power shift was palpable. She flailed with words while I held the strength of silence. Henry had armed me with this quiet, and I would wield it like a shield. When the reading was over, Dalton asked Michael and Vanessa to step outside for a moment. He handed me a separate envelope, its paper worn from being handled many times. Henry asked me to give this only to you, he said softly. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was Henry's letter. The ink faded slightly, but the words sharp. Clara, if you are holding this, it means my time has ended. I am sorry I could not explain in person. I saw Vanessa's intentions. I worried for Michael blind in his devotion. I placed everything in your name, not for luxury, but for protection. Guard Aaron. Guard Michael even from himself. Do not argue. Do not explain. Your silence will disarm them. The law is on your side. Patience will be your weapon. I trust you with all I have left my family. Tears blurred my vision, dripping onto the page. My heart ached, but it beat stronger at the same time. Henry had trusted me completely. He had prepared me even in death. I folded the letter carefully, sliding it back into the envelope. My hands no longer shook. As I stepped out of Dalton's office into the gray drizzle of the city streets, I whispered to myself a vow only Henry could hear. I will stay silent. I will stay steady, and I will not fail you. The rain fell harder, but inside I felt a strange fire. Something had shifted. The battle had already begun. It was only a week after the will was read when Vanessa appeared at my door. She did not call ahead. She simply arrived carrying a glossy leather handbag and a smile stretched too wide to be real. I invited her in out of politeness, if nothing else. She sat down at my kitchen table, the very table where Henry used to read the morning paper. I set the kettle on the stove, the whistle filling the silence between us. She tapped her manicured nails against the wood, her leg bouncing beneath the tablecloth. Clara. She began, her voice syrupy. I've been thinking. I know things have been tense since the will was read, but we are family. Michael is devastated. Aaron is confused. And I think we should focus on healing. I poured hot water into the teapot and brought it to the table. Tea. She nodded, leaning forward. What I'm saying is, maybe the best way forward is to make things simple. Those houses, that plaza, the stocks. It's a lot for one person, especially at your age. You've already got your home. Why not transfer some of the assets back into Michael's name? We could sell a few properties, put the money in a joint account. It would keep peace in the family. I poured her tea steady as stone. I stirred mine slowly, the spoon circling without sound. She smiled again, though her eyes flickered with impatience. Think of Aaron. He deserves stability. Fighting over all this will only make things harder for him. I finally looked up at her. My voice was calm, but my gaze was firm. Henry made his choices. He was careful. Her mask slipped. Dad is being unreasonable. Do you really want to split this family apart? Michael is hurting and you're just sitting here clinging to paper. You're tearing us apart. I set down my spoon, folded my hands, and replied quietly, No, Vanessa. I am not tearing this family apart. You are. Her mouth tightened. She had not expected resistance, at least not delivered in such simple words. Rage burned in her eyes, but she swallowed it down with a quick sip of tea. I did not argue further. I let silence fill the room, thick and suffocating. It unsettled her more than any shouting could have. She shifted in her seat, tapping her nails harder against the table. Words had always been her weapon. My silence dulled their edge. Finally, she stood, pushing her chair back with a scrape. You may think you've won, Clara, but you can't keep control forever. Michael is my husband. Aaron is my son. You can't cut me out. I stayed seated calm, my hand resting on Henry's coat draped across the back of my chair. This isn't about cutting anyone out. It's about honoring what Henry saw and protecting what matters. Her nostrils flared. We'll see. She snatched her handbag and stormed out, her heels clicking hard against the floorboards. When the door closed, I let out the breath I had been holding. My hands trembled as I cleared the cups, setting them in the sink. Then I went to the drawer by the telephone stand and pulled out a plain notebook. On the first page I wrote the date. Vanessa came to the house, pressured me to sign over assets, appealed to family unity, grew angry when I refused, left with veiled threats. I closed the notebook and slid it back into the drawer. Henry's words echoed in my mind. Stay silent. Stay steady. The paperwork will shield you. Patience will be your weapon. From that day on, I recorded everything. Every conversation, every glance, every odd occurrence, silence in public, precision in private. That evening I called Dalton. His voice was calm, reassuring, the voice of a man who had guided Henry through decades of contracts. You did well, Clara. Never sign anything. Keep records. The more detail you have, the stronger your shield will be. I felt her anger. I admitted. She wants control, and she thinks she can bully me into it. Dalton sighed. She will try every tactic, manipulation, guilt, even using Aaron. You must prepare yourself. But remember, you have the law on your side, and you have Henry's foresight. After the call, I sat at the kitchen table alone, the steam from the teacups still curling into the air. I ran my fingers over the surface of the wood, tracing the scratches Henry's coffee mug had left over the years. Grief swelled in me again, raw and suffocating. But alongside it was something else. Resolve. Vanessa believed I was weak, an old widow clinging to scraps. But she did not know the strength that grows in silence, the kind of strength Henry had trusted me to wield. I turned off the light in the kitchen, the house falling into shadow. The notebook in the drawer felt heavier than paper. It felt like armor. I whispered into the quiet to Henry, to myself, I will not fail you. And for the first time since that phone rang at 2:03 a.m., I believed it. One Friday afternoon, a week after Vanessa's visit to my kitchen, the phone rang again. This time it was Aaron's school. The secretary's voice was careful, almost apologetic. Mrs. Caldwell, Aaron has been waiting for quite some time. His mother was supposed to pick him up, but she hasn't arrived. Could you come? I felt the sting of it before I even grabbed my keys. Vanessa had forgotten her son. When I arrived, Aaron sat on the bench outside the office, his backpack dangling from one shoulder. His small legs swung back and forth, patient but tired. The moment he saw me, his face lit up. "Grandma," he cried, running into my arms. I hugged him tightly, the knot in my chest, both painful and tender. "I'm here, sweetheart," I whispered. "Let's get you home." In the car, Aaron chattered the way children do when they've been waiting too long. Mommy said she was going on a trip. She told me not to tell Daddy, but I can tell you right. Grandma, I kept my eyes on the road. You can always tell me, Aaron. He leaned closer, lowering his voice, though there was no one else in the car. She went to Miami with Mr. Richard. He bought her ice cream on the beach. She sent me a picture, but told me not to show Daddy. The words landed heavy. Miami. Richard, the man I had seen at the funeral. My hands tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. Aaron continued, innocently unaware of the weight of what he said. She said, "Mr. Richard might get us a big house in Arizona with a pool, but I don't want to move. I like it here with you and Daddy." I pulled into my driveway and parked, leaving the engine running for a moment. I turned to him slowly, my throat dry. "Arizona," he nodded, swinging his legs. "Yeah," Mommy said. "Arizona is sunny and far away, but I told her I'd miss Saturday pancakes with you." That sentence cracked something in me. My heart swelled with grief and fury at once. Henry had been right. He had seen her ambition, her deceit before any of us. And now, through the pure voice of an 8-year-old, the truth was spilling out. Inside the house, I sat Aaron at the table with a glass of milk and some cookies. He munched happily crumbs, scattering, humming a little tune Henry used to whistle. I stood behind him, resting my hands on the back of his chair, watching the innocence in his movements. Then the weight of it pressed me down. I walked into the living room, lowered myself onto the couch, and buried my face in Henry's coat. The scent of him was fainter now, but enough to summon memories. His laughter on Sunday mornings, the sound of his boots by the door, the scratch of his pen on those little notes he used to leave me. My body shook silently. I did not cry loud. The tears slid slowly, soaking the wool beneath my cheek. I whispered into the fabric as if Henry could hear me through it. "You were right, Henry. She's planning to take him away, to take everything away, but I will not let her." That was the moment. My grief folded into resolve. I pressed the coat tighter, drawing strength from the memory of the man who had trusted me to guard what mattered. When I returned to the kitchen, Aaron looked up with cookie crumbs around his lips. "Grandma, are you sad?" I wiped my cheeks quickly and forced a smile. "A little, sweetheart, but having you here makes me better." He reached out his small hand, placing it over mine. "Don't worry, I won't let Mommy make us move. I'll tell Daddy if she tries." His faith in me was both a balm and a burden. He did not know how fragile his world had become, or how ruthless his mother could be, but his words anchored me. That night after Aaron was asleep, I opened my notebook again. The pages were already filling. I wrote carefully, Vanessa absent from school pickup. Aaron reports she traveled to Miami with Richard Harlow. He says she spoke of moving to Arizona permanently. Evidence of concealment from Michael. Potential plan to relocate child. I underlined Arizona twice. Then I picked up the phone and called Dalton. His voice came steady through the line. "You're doing exactly what you should, Clara. Record everything. A pattern will emerge and the court will see it. But do not confront her yet. Patience. Remember, your silence will be stronger than any argument." After the call, I walked through the darkened house, checking each lock, each window. I paused at Aaron's door, watching him sleep, his small chest rising and falling peacefully. I whispered into the shadows, "I will keep you safe no matter the cost." For the first time in weeks, I felt certainty. The battle was not about assets, not about pride. It was about protecting an innocent boy from a mother who saw him as a bargaining chip. I turned off the light, Henry's coat draped over my arm, and went to bed with a vow burning in my heart. It was a Wednesday evening when Vanessa called me out of the blue. Her voice was sweet, almost melodic, like she had rehearsed it. "Clara," she said, "let's have dinner. Just the two of us. I think we can talk this through woman to woman." My first instinct was to refuse, but Henry's letter echoed in my memory. "Stay silent. Stay steady. Patience will be your weapon." So I agreed, knowing there was a reason she wanted me away from Michael and Aaron. She chose an upscale restaurant in the city, the kind with low lighting and glasses that sparkled like jewels under chandeliers. The maitre d' greeted her by name. I followed in my plain navy dress, Henry's coat folded neatly over my arm. She looked at me with a smile that did not touch her eyes. We sat across from each other in a red leather booth. The waiter poured water and retreated. Vanessa didn't even glance at the menu. Instead, she pulled a slim folder from her handbag and slid it across the table. I wanted to make this easier on everyone. "We don't need to drag this through lawyers and courts. Here is a proposal. If you transfer the properties and the stocks into a trust under my name, I'll make sure you get what you want. In exchange, I'll allow you to see Aaron every weekend. We can even put it in writing." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words hung heavy between us. She wasn't even pretending anymore. She was bartering her own child as though he were a commodity. My throat tightened. My chest ached, but I kept my face still, my hands folded calmly on the table. I remembered Henry's words. She will fight. Do not argue. Do not explain. Vanessa leaned closer, lowering her voice. Think of it as a fair trade. You keep your dignity. I keep control. And Aaron doesn't get caught in the middle. Everybody wins. I lifted my water glass slowly, taking a sip to steady myself. I did not reply. My silence made her frown. She tapped the folder with her manicured nail. You should read it. I had a lawyer draft it. Very professional. All you'd need to do is sign. I opened the folder carefully. The legal language blurred before my eyes, but the meaning was clear. Transfer of title, transfer of funds. Her name everywhere mine once was. I closed it again, sliding it back across the table. Still, I said nothing. Her composure cracked. Clara, stop being stubborn. This isn't about money. This is about family. You're the one keeping us divided. I looked at her, finally speaking my voice low and firm. No, Vanessa, you are the one dividing us. The words landed like a stone. She froze, then forced a laugh, sharp and humorless. You really think you can hold on forever? You're old, Clara. Do you really want to spend your last years in courtrooms and lawyers' offices? Just sign and you'll have peace. I'll even make sure Aaron respects you. Her arrogance nearly broke my calm. But then, in that moment, something sparked inside me. My mind returned to Henry's letter, the steady strokes of his handwriting. Patience will be your weapon. I looked into her eyes, and instead of fear, I felt clarity. Henry had seen this exact moment before it happened. He had known she would dangle Aaron like bait, and he had armed me with silence. I folded my napkin carefully and placed it on the table. Dinner was fine. Thank you. Her lips curled. You'll regret this. She snatched the folder, shoved it into her handbag, and stood up so quickly her chair nearly toppled. The waiter turned startled, but she swept out without looking back. I sat for a moment longer, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. My heart pounded, but my eyes burned with a strange light. She thought she had cornered me, but in truth, she had revealed herself. When I left the restaurant, the city lights blurred through the misty air. I clutched Henry's coat close to me, whispering, "You knew, didn't you? You saw this coming." At home, I took out my notebook and wrote every detail. The restaurant, her words, the folder, the ultimatum. Then I slipped the notebook into my drawer and picked up the phone. Dalton. I said when the line connected, she made her move. She tried to make me sign everything away in exchange for visitation rights with Aaron. There was a pause. Then his voice came calm and firm. Good. That is the evidence we need. Did you take the folder? She took it, I admitted. But I remember every word. Write it all down, he instructed. And Clara, you are stronger than you think. Henry was right to trust you. I hung up and sat in the quiet house. Henry's coat draped across my lap, my fingers tracing the worn fabric. For the first time, I did not feel like a widow, merely surviving. I felt like a guardian standing watch, silent, but resolute. Vanessa had shown me her hand, and I had not flinched. The storm inside me had calmed, replaced by something stronger. The quiet that comes not from weakness, but from knowing you hold the truth. She could rage and threaten and scheme, but she could not make me bend. Henry had trusted me to protect what mattered, and in that trust, I found my strength. The silence of the house wrapped around me like a blanket, no longer suffocating, but sheltering. I was not alone in this fight. Henry's foresight walked with me. Aaron's innocence guided me. And somewhere beneath the grief and the fear, I found a part of myself I had forgotten the woman Henry had seen when he wrote those words. Stay silent. Stay steady. Your silence will disarm them. Patience will be your weapon. In the darkness of that kitchen, with Henry's coat pressed against my cheek, I made a promise, not just to Henry or to Aaron, but to myself. I would not break. I would not bend. I would stand firm in the quiet strength that comes from knowing you are fighting for what matters. The battle had begun, but I was ready. The weapon was patience, and it would not fail. I sat behind Aaron at the kitchen table, watching him eat cookies, scattering crumbs across the wooden surface as he hummed the tune Henry used to whistle. The afternoon light caught in his sandy hair, turning it gold at the edges. Through the window, I could see the maple tree Henry had planted when we first bought this house. Its leaves had started to turn red, bleeding into green. Time was passing, spinning forward despite everything that had stopped in my world. The weight of Aaron's innocent revelations about Miami and Arizona pressed down on me like a physical force. His mother's secret trip with Richard Harlow. Their plans for a new life far away from here. The casual way she had instructed her 8-year-old son to keep secrets from his father. Each thought was a stone added to the burden I now carried. I retreated to the living room and buried my face in Henry's coat. Its wool scratched against my cheek, the familiar scent fading a little more each day. "You were right, Henry," I whispered into the fabric. "She's planning to take him away, to take everything away. But I will not let her." The next morning I woke before dawn. Sleep had become a fragile thing since Henry's death, thin and easily broken. I made coffee using the precise method Henry had taught me water just off the boil grounds, measured in the wooden spoon he'd carved himself. I breathed in the steam rising from the mug, gathering strength for what lay ahead. Aaron had left his backpack by the front door. I checked inside, finding crumpled homework assignments, a half-eaten granola bar, and his inhaler nearly empty. Vanessa consistently forgot about his asthma, treating it as an inconvenience rather than a medical condition. I made a note to call his doctor for a refill, then tucked the inhaler into the front pocket where he could reach it easily. When Aaron shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes, I had pancakes waiting. "Not as good as Grandpa's," he said, drowning them in maple syrup, but still yummy. I packed his lunch with care, the sandwich cut diagonally the way he preferred apple slices to prevent his braces from catching on whole fruit, and a note tucked beside his juice box. "Be brave today. I love you. Grandma." After dropping him at school, I drove to the nearest pharmacy and ordered a new inhaler, explaining his mother had misplaced the prescription information. The pharmacist checked Aaron's records and frowned. "This is the third emergency refill in 2 months. Is everything okay at home?" I let the question hang in the air for a moment, then nodded without elaboration. The pharmacist's concerned expression joined the growing collection of evidence I was gathering. One more note to add to my journal. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end was hesitant, almost apologetic. "Mrs. Caldwell, this is Marge, Henry's assistant. I've been organizing his files, and there's something I think you should know. We met at a small cafe 3 blocks from the office where Henry had worked for decades. Marge was younger than me, but old enough to have witnessed the entire arc of Henry's career. She carried a leather portfolio that looked like one Henry used to own. I wasn't sure if I should reach out," she began, stirring her coffee without drinking it. "But Mr. Caldwell, Henry, he asked me to keep records. Said it might be important someday." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were dates, Times notes, written in Marge's precise handwriting. Detailed accounts of Vanessa's visits to the office, phone calls taken in Henry's private conference room, documents she had asked to see regarding property holdings. "He suspected something wasn't right," Marge continued. "Last time your daughter-in-law visited, she spent 40 minutes on Henry's phone when she thought I'd left for lunch. I heard her mention Arizona property values to someone named Richard. When I told Henry, that's when he started making changes to his will. The folder contained photographs as well, Vanessa leaving expensive restaurants with Richard Harlow, the two of them, examining architectural drawings in the back of a luxury car, documentation of a relationship that had clearly begun long before Henry's death. I never wanted to believe your son was being deceived, Marge said, her eyes downcast. But Henry was like family to me. He wanted someone to witness what was happening. He wanted you to have proof when you needed it. I thanked her, my voice steadier than I felt. The weight of Henry's foresight struck me anew. Even in his final months, he had been laying groundwork, creating a network of evidence and support. He had seen the storm gathering and had quietly prepared for it, not with confrontation, but with careful documentation. The next morning, I called Dalton and arranged a meeting. His office felt different now, less a place of grief and shock, and more a war room where strategy would be planned. I brought Marge's folder, my own notebook, and Henry's letter. Dalton reviewed everything methodically, his expression growing more determined with each page. "This is excellent work, Clara. Henry laid the foundation, and you're building on it perfectly." He outlined next steps, concrete actions beyond simple documentation. We'll set up security cameras at the rental properties. Vanessa has been spotted entering 2 of them without authorization. We'll establish financial monitoring systems to track any attempts to access accounts. And we'll create a special educational trust for Aaron that cannot be diverted to other purposes. I absorbed the legal terminology, determined to understand every protective mechanism. Dalton's explanations were clear, patient. He had been Henry's friend as well as his attorney, and I could see him fighting not just for legal principles, but for Henry's legacy. As I drove home, I passed the Caldwell Shopping Plaza, the red brick structure Henry had built from a neglected corner lot into a thriving community hub. Cars filled the parking lot. People carried shopping bags through the wide glass doors. This wasn't just property, it was Henry's vision, his contribution to a neighborhood he loved. The thought of it being used as collateral for Richard Harlow's schemes made my hands tighten on the steering wheel. I drove past 2 of our rental properties, modest homes where families lived at below-market rates because Henry believed in fair housing more than maximum profit. Another vision Vanessa would destroy if given the chance. Through the window of one house, I saw children playing in a living room, safe and secure in a home that might not exist for them if Vanessa succeeded. When I arrived home, Michael's car sat in the driveway. He rarely visited these days, finding excuses to avoid being alone with me. The sight of his sedan parked at an awkward angle sent a flutter of hope through me. Perhaps he was beginning to see through Vanessa's manipulations. That hope died the moment I entered the living room. Michael stood by the fireplace, his posture, stiff eyes unable to meet mine. Vanessa sat on the sofa, legs crossed at the ankle, a practiced expression of concern on her face. "Mom," Michael began, his voice strained, "we need to talk about the will." I set my purse down and took a seat in Henry's old armchair, its leather worn to the contours of a body no longer present. I did not speak, waiting for whatever rehearsed speech they had prepared. "We've decided to contest it," Michael continued. "What Dad did wasn't fair. I was his only son. These properties, the Plaza, they should have been shared. Vanessa and I have already spoken with a lawyer. He says we have grounds based on undue influence." The accusation hung in the air between us. Undue influence. As if I had manipulated, Henry twisted his judgment in his final months. As if 50 years of marriage had been a long con culminating in this inheritance. Vanessa leaned forward, her expression a perfect simulation of empathy. "Clara, we don't want this to get ugly, but Michael deserves his birthright. Surely you can see how this looks. A dying man suddenly cutting out his only child." I felt a strange calm settle over me, the same stillness that had unnerved Vanessa in Dalton's office. Henry's words echoed in my mind. "Do not argue, do not explain." Michael finally met my eyes, his gaze pleading. "Mom, please, say something. We can work this out without courts, without lawyers. Just sign the properties over, and we can all move forward as a family." The word family in his mouth sounded hollow, shaped by Vanessa's influence. I wondered if he knew about Miami, about Arizona. I wondered if he could feel himself being slowly separated from his roots, like a plant being carefully extracted for transplanting. "I love you, Michael," I said simply. "Your father loved you too, more than you know." His face flushed. "Then why did he do this? Why did he leave me nothing but books and tools when there were millions in property? Because they weren't just properties to your father. They were his legacy, his vision for this community, his provision for Aaron's future." At the mention of Aaron, Vanessa's expression flickered a brief crack in her composed facade. Michael didn't notice, too absorbed in his own perceived betrayal. "Mom, Vanessa and I are planning to move. We've been looking at opportunities in Arizona. A fresh start would be good for all of us. Aaron would have better schools, a bigger house." Every word confirmed what Aaron had already revealed. The pieces were falling into place exactly as Henry had anticipated. I did not react to the mention of Arizona, gave no indication I already knew their plans. "Think about what your father would want," I said softly. "Think about what's best for Aaron." Michael's expression hardened, the gentleness he'd inherited from Henry giving way to something colder, more calculated. Vanessa's influence etched into the lines of his face. "What's best for Aaron is his parents making decisions for him, not his grandmother." He said the words clearly, not his own. "If you fight us on this, Mom, you'll lose, and you'll lose Aaron too." The threat landed like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs but kept my expression neutral. In my mind, I added this moment to my growing evidence file, the subtle coercion, the threat of separating me from my grandson. After they left, I sat alone in the quiet house, Henry's coat draped across my lap. For the first time, I nearly broke my silence. I almost called Michael back, almost laid out everything I knew, the affair, the secret plans, the manipulation. The words pressed against my teeth, desperate to be spoken. But then I remembered Henry's steady handwriting guard Michael even from himself. Some truths had to be discovered, not told. If I revealed everything now, Michael would retreat further into Vanessa's influence, defensive and angry. I had to let events unfold, had to trust Henry's strategy of patience and documentation. That night, after recording every detail of the confrontation in my notebook, I lay awake listening to the autumn wind rattle the windows. The house creaked and settled around me, familiar sounds that had once been comforting, now echoing with absence. My fingers traced the empty space beside me where Henry should have been. The hardest part wasn't facing Vanessa's schemes or Michael's misguided anger. The hardest part was bearing these burdens alone without Henry's steady presence, without his voice reassuring me that we would weather this storm together. For 50 years we had faced every challenge as one. Now I carried our last battle by myself. But I wasn't truly alone. Henry's foresight walked with me. His plans protected me. His voice guided me through the letter I read each night before sleep. Patience will be your weapon. A week passed, then 2. Autumn deepened the trees around our house, blazing with color, before surrendering to November winds. I settled into new routines with Aaron, who spent increasing time at my house as Vanessa's business trips grew more frequent. I checked his homework, monitored his asthma medication, maintained the Saturday pancake tradition. Aaron grew more talkative about his mother's absences, his father's distraction. One evening, as I tucked him into bed in the guest room that was gradually becoming his own, he asked a question that broke my heart. "Grandma, why doesn't Mommy want to be with me anymore?" I smoothed his hair back from his forehead, buying time to compose an answer that would protect him while honoring the truth. "Sometimes grown-ups get confused about what's important," I told him. "They forget that the greatest treasures aren't things you can buy or places you can go. They're the people you love." He considered this with the solemn thoughtfulness of children. "Then why does she keep going away with Mr. Richard? Does she love him more than me and Daddy?" The question held no jealousy, only curiosity, the pure desire to understand a world that increasingly made no sense to him. I held his small hand in mine, feeling the pulse of his heartbeat against my palm. "No one who truly knows you could love anyone more," I said. "Your mother is making choices right now, but those choices aren't because of anything you did or didn't do. You are perfect exactly as you are." He nodded, accepting this answer with the trust children place in adults who have never lied to them. Then he pulled his stuffed bear, a gift from Henry years ago, closer to his chest and asked me to leave the hall light on. I stood in the doorway watching him drift toward sleep, his breathing slow and steady. The strength of my love for this child crashed over me like a wave, nearly buckling my knees with its force. In that moment, I understood with absolute clarity that I would do whatever necessary to protect him, not just from Vanessa's neglect, but from the pain of watching his family fracture. The next morning, Dalton called with news. "Clara," he said, "I've received information from the private investigator Henry hired. I think you should come to the office." The investigator's report was comprehensive. Financial records showing Richard Harlow's previous business failures, his pattern of using romantic relationships to access capital, property listings in Arizona where he and Vanessa had toured model homes during the week of Henry's funeral. Most damning of all, text message transcripts retrieved from Richard's discarded phone. "Vanessa." He's so blind. I could tell him the sky is green, and he'd nod. "Richard. What about the boy Vanessa deadweight? A liability. I can't stand dragging him around. Once we're settled in Arizona, maybe boarding school." "Richard. Or leave him with her, me." The woman Vanessa saw as nothing more than an inconvenient elderly relative, a barrier between her and wealth. The grandmother she would use as a convenient childcare option while pursuing her new life. But what struck deepest wasn't Vanessa's callousness toward me. It was the casual cruelty with which she dismissed her own son. Dead weight, a liability, words no mother should ever think, much less say, about her child. I closed the folder, my hand trembling not with fear, but with a cold, clear anger I had never experienced before. For weeks I had maintained my silence out of strategy, following Henry's instructions. Now that silence became a choice born of dignity, Vanessa's words didn't deserve a response. They would answer themselves in time. Dalton's voice broke through my thoughts. "You see now why Henry put everything in your name. He wasn't being cruel to Michael. He was protecting him and Aaron. He wanted you to carry this responsibility because he knew you could." I wiped my eyes with the corner of Henry's coat that I still carried everywhere. My voice trembled but held firm. "Then I will. I won't let her destroy what Henry built or what Aaron deserves." Dalton nodded. "Keep documenting. Keep silent. The time will come to reveal all of this, and when it does, Vanessa won't be able to hide behind charm or manipulation. The evidence is clear. Until then, patience." The summons arrived on a Tuesday morning, a crisp white envelope delivered by courier. Inside was formal notification that Michael and Vanessa had filed a petition in probate court challenging Henry's will on grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity. The legal language was cold clinical, but I could hear Vanessa's voice in every line. "Clara Caldwell, an elderly widow, is unfit to manage assets of this size. Her actions are selfish and detrimental to her son and grandson." Elderly. As if my 67 years had rendered me incompetent, incapable of managing the very properties I had helped Henry acquire and maintain throughout our marriage. As if age itself were a disqualification for responsibility rather than the source of wisdom Henry had trusted. I called Dalton immediately. His response was measured, unsurprised. "This was expected, Clara. We're prepared. The court date is set for next month. Continue as you have been. Documentation, observation, patience." That evening I stood in Aaron's doorway watching him sleep, his small body curled protectively around his teddy bear. The soft glow of his nightlight painted shadows across his face, so innocent in slumber, unaware of the battle being waged around him. The doorframe felt like a threshold. On one side was my sorrow, heavy and suffocating. On the other side was my choice, my resolve, the duty Henry had entrusted to me. I gripped the frame and whispered to myself, "This is where it changes." I knelt beside Aaron's bed and brushed his hair back from his forehead. He stirred but didn't wake. My tears slid silently, dropping onto his blanket, but they weren't just tears of grief anymore. They were tears of purpose, of determination. Henry had seen the storm coming. He had chosen me as the anchor that would hold this family together when the winds of Vanessa's ambition threatened to scatter us all. When I finally rose, I pulled Aaron's door halfway closed, leaving a sliver of light shining into the hallway. It was symbolic, though no one else would see it. I was no longer standing in the doorway, torn between despair and action. I had crossed the threshold into certainty. In the days that followed, Vanessa escalated her campaign. She scheduled inspections of the rental properties, arriving with clipboards and cameras, documenting minor maintenance issues as evidence of my mismanagement. She arranged for real estate agents to evaluate the shopping plaza, claiming she was just gathering information. She began telling friends and neighbors that she was concerned about my mental health, my unhealthy attachment to Henry's possessions. Each move was calculated to create a narrative of an elderly widow overwhelmed by responsibility, clinging to the past rather than considering her family's future. With each maneuver, I added to my documentation, photographing the properties after her visits to prove they were well-maintained, recording conversations with tenants who appreciated the fair rents and prompt repairs. Michael remained caught between us, increasingly withdrawn from both. He stopped visiting the house, communicating only through brief phone calls to check on Aaron. I could hear the conflict in his voice, the struggle between the loyalty he felt toward his wife and the dawning suspicion that something wasn't right. One afternoon, I discovered him in Henry's workshop behind the garage. He stood among his father's tools, running his fingers over the lathe Henry had used to create the wooden bowls that graced our dining room. I watched from the doorway, not announcing my presence, as Michael picked up projects his father had left unfinished, a small jewelry box, a toy train for Aaron. The set of his shoulders, the careful way he handled each tool, reminded me so powerfully of Henry that my breath caught. For a moment, I could see the boy he had been learning at his father's side, and the man Henry had hoped he would become. When he finally sensed my presence and turned, his eyes were red-rimmed. He said nothing about the court case, nothing about Vanessa or Arizona or inheritance. He simply held up the half-finished jewelry box and asked, "Do you remember what kind of finish Dad used on these?" It was the first time since Henry's death that Michael had reached for connection rather than confrontation. I stepped into the workshop, breathing in the scent of sawdust and varnish. Danish oil, I told him. He always said it brought out the grain better than polyurethane. Michael nodded, turning the box in his hands. "I'll finish it," he said quietly. "For Aaron." It was a small moment, but it lit a flame of hope. Beneath the anger and confusion Vanessa had cultivated, the real Michael Henry's son still existed. He just needed time to find his way back to himself. The next week brought the most decisive confrontation yet. Vanessa called me to suggest dinner, just the two of us, woman to woman. The invitation carried all the warmth of a summons, but I accepted knowing she had a reason for wanting me away from Michael and Aaron. She chose an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind where waiters hovered in pressed black jackets and wine lists came in leather-bound portfolios. I wore my simple navy dress, Henry's coat folded over my arm despite the evening's warmth. The maitre d' greeted Vanessa by name, leading us to a secluded booth at the back. She ordered, without looking at the menu, a practiced display of belonging in this rarefied space. I declined wine, asking for water, watching her measure my choices against her own expectations. The waiter retreated, leaving us in a silence thick with unspoken accusations. Vanessa broke it first, her voice dropping into the sympathetic register she used when performing concern. "Clara," she began, "I know these past months have been difficult for everyone. Grief does strange things to people, makes them hold on when they should let go." I said nothing, watching her construct her narrative piece by careful piece. Her fingers traced the stem of her wine-glass nails, freshly manicured a deep burgundy. Every detail of her appearance was calculated, the subtle makeup that emphasized vulnerability rather than glamour, the modest jewelry that suggested restraint rather than extravagance. She reached into her purse and extracted a slim folder bound in leather, sliding it across the table with manicured fingers. "I wanted to make this easier on everyone," she continued. "We don't need to drag this through lawyers and courts. Here's a proposal." I opened the folder, scanning documents drafted in precise legal language. The terms were breathtakingly bold in their audacity. In exchange for transferring all properties and investments to a trust under Vanessa's control, she would allow me to see Aaron every weekend. She was bartering her own child like a commodity in a business negotiation. The realization sent ice through my veins, but I kept my expression neutral, remembering Henry's guidance. "Do not argue. Do not explain." Vanessa leaned closer, lowering her voice as if sharing confidences. "Think of it as a fair trade. You keep your dignity. I keep control. And Aaron doesn't get caught in the middle. Everybody wins." I lifted my water glass, taking a sip to steady myself. My silence made her frown. She tapped the folder with her nail, the sound sharp against the hushed restaurant ambiance. "You should read it. I had a lawyer draft it. Very professional. All you'd need to do is sign." I closed the folder and slid it back across the table without comment. The absence of response unnerved her more than any argument could have. "Clara," she said, voice hardening, "stop being stubborn. This isn't about money. This is about family. You're the one keeping us divided." I looked at her, then really looked at her. Behind the perfectly applied makeup, behind the practiced concern, I saw calculation. I saw ambition. I saw a woman who viewed relationships as transactions and love as a weakness to be exploited. "No, Vanessa," I said quietly. "You are the one dividing us." The simple truth landed between us like a gauntlet thrown down. She froze momentarily, then forced a laugh that contained no humor. "You really think you can hold on forever? You're old, Clara. Do you really want to spend your last years in courtrooms and lawyers' offices? Just sign and you'll have peace. I'll even make sure Aaron respects you." The threat was implicit but clear. Sign or lose access to your grandson entirely. In that moment, I felt something crystallize within me. Not anger, though that existed too, but absolute certainty. Henry had seen this moment coming. He had prepared me for exactly this confrontation. Patience will be your weapon. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my untouched plate. Dinner was fine. Thank you. The deliberate dismissal struck deeper than rage ever could. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. You'll regret this. She snatched the folder and shoved it into her handbag, rising so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Heads turned throughout the restaurant, witnessing her loss of composure. She swept out without looking back, leaving me to settle the bill she had strategically abandoned. I walked to my car through misty rain streetlights haloed in the damp air. Henry's coat pressed against my side like a shield. You knew, didn't you? I whispered into the night. You saw this coming. At home, I recorded every detail of the encounter, the restaurant. Her words, the contents of the folder, her final threat. The notebook had become a chronicle, not just of Vanessa's schemes, but of my own transformation from grieving widow to determined guardian. I called Dalton from the kitchen table, the house dark except for the single lamp illuminating my notes. She tried to make me sign everything away in exchange for visitation rights with Aaron. I told him, my voice steadier than I expected. That is exactly the evidence we need, he replied. The courts will see this for what it is, attempted coercion using a child as leverage. We're ready, Clara. The hearing is in 2 weeks. Everything is in place. After the call, I sat in the silent kitchen, Henry's coat draped across my lap like a blanket. Through the window, I could see stars emerging as the clouds cleared pinpoints of light in the vast darkness. I traced the familiar constellations Henry had taught me to recognize during our first summer together, finding patterns in chaos, meaning in emptiness. For the first time since his death, I didn't feel crushed by his absence. Instead, I felt prepared for what lay ahead. The battle lines were drawn. Vanessa had shown her true intentions. All that remained was to let justice unfold at its own pace. Sometimes victory doesn't announce itself with trumpets and cheers. Sometimes it arrives quietly in a courtroom where truth finally speaks louder than deception. Sometimes it comes through patience, through standing firm when others expect you to crumble. Sometimes strength isn't about fighting loudest, but about enduring longest. The thoughts settled around me like a mantle of calm. I was ready for what came next. Henry had seen the threat clearly. He had chosen his champion wisely, and I would not fail him. The courthouse stood like a monument to order, its limestone facade rising above the surrounding buildings in stark contrast to the chaotic emotions churning within me. I passed through security, Henry's coat draped across my arm, despite the warmth of the late autumn day. No longer just for comfort, it had become a talisman, a reminder of who I was fighting for and why. Dalton waited at the entrance to courtroom C, his silver hair catching the light from tall windows, his posture as unwavering as his principles. He carried a leather portfolio containing months of meticulous documentation, the investigator's photographs, Marge's records, my journal entries, financial analyses of Richard Harlow's previous failed ventures, and detailed valuations of the properties Henry had entrusted to me. Remember, he said quietly as we entered the courtroom, their strategy will be emotional appeal. Ours is evidence. The courtroom's polished benches stood in regimented rows. I took my seat at the plaintiff's table, hands folded over my notebook, outwardly calm, though my heart knocked against my ribs with the persistence of truth demanding to be heard. Vanessa arrived moments later, the click of her heels announcing her presence before she appeared. She wore a fitted red dress, bold and confident. Richard Harlow lingered near the back of the courtroom, close enough to observe, but maintaining deniable distance. I noticed how he positioned himself near the exit, a man accustomed to quick departures. Michael entered several paces behind Vanessa, looking older than his 40 years. He took his seat beside her without glancing in my direction, but I noticed how he positioned himself slightly apart from her, the space between them a physical manifestation of growing doubt. The judge entered a woman in her 60s, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. Her gaze swept across the courtroom, assessing cataloging, preparing to separate truth from performance. Vanessa's attorney rose first, his expensive suit matching his practiced confidence. Your Honor, today we address a matter of family justice. My clients, Michael and Vanessa Caldwell, seek equitable distribution of assets that should rightfully be shared among family members. Mrs. Clara Caldwell, the elderly widow of Henry Caldwell, currently holds sole control of 12 rental properties, a shopping plaza, and substantial stock investments assets that Henry Caldwell developed with the understanding they would benefit his son and grandson. The characterization burned like acid, elderly widow, a dismissal wrapped in false respect. I kept my expression neutral, remembering that appearances in this room were merely the surface. We believe Henry Caldwell's final changes to his will were made under undue influence at a time when his judgment was compromised by declining health. We ask the court to set aside this flawed document and establish a more equitable distribution that honors the deceased's true intentions for his family's future. Vanessa dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, a performance refined through repetition. Michael sat motionless, his gaze fixed on his hands. Dalton stood, his movements deliberate, unhurried. Your Honor, the will contested today was not a deathbed decision made in haste or under coercion. It was executed 3 months before Henry Caldwell's passing after consultation with financial advisors and estate planners. It represents not just asset distribution, but a protective structure designed specifically to prevent exploitation. He outlined how Henry had established an irrevocable trust with me as trustee, creating tax advantages while preventing quick liquidation of assets. He explained the portfolio's purpose to provide sustainable income through careful management, not to be sold off for short-term gain, as Vanessa and Richard had planned. These properties house 17 families at below-market rates, Dalton continued. The shopping plaza supports 32 small businesses. Mr. Caldwell built a legacy of community support, not simply a collection of assets to be liquidated. The judge nodded, making notes. I'm particularly interested in the timing of these arrangements. Why would Mr. Caldwell make such significant changes 3 months before his death, when by all accounts his health appeared stable? Dalton opened his briefcase and withdrew the leather-bound portfolio. The evidence before you will answer that question definitively, Your Honor. The judge accepted it, paging through methodically. With each turned page, her expression shifted subtly, the lines around her mouth deepening. Vanessa shifted in her seat, manicured fingers tapping against the table with increasing urgency. Michael leaned forward, trying to glimpse the document's confusion giving way to apprehension. Mrs. Caldwell, the judge addressed Vanessa directly, are you acquainted with a Mr. Richard Harlow? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Vanessa's gaze flickered toward the back of the courtroom. Richard's posture changed, body angling toward the exit. I know Mr. Harlow professionally. He's a developer interested in some of the properties my father-in-law owned. Professionally. The word stood alone, a falsehood so transparent it seemed to hover in the air. The judge held up a photograph from our evidence file, Vanessa and Richard leaving a Miami hotel, his arm around her waist. According to these records, you and Mr. Harlow toured properties in Arizona during the week of Henry Caldwell's funeral. You discussed relocating your son Aaron to Arizona, potentially placing him in boarding school. Is this accurate? Michael's head snapped toward Vanessa, his voice barely audible. During my father's funeral, she reached for his arm. Michael, I can explain. This is being twisted, taken out of context. He pulled away from her touch, the first time I'd ever seen him reject her. The judge continued, Mrs. Caldwell, these property listings in Arizona show your signature on preliminary purchase agreements dated the same week as Henry Caldwell's funeral. The funding source is listed as Caldwell Family Holdings, properties you did not control. Can you explain this discrepancy? Vanessa's composure fractured. I was exploring options for our family's future. There's nothing wrong with that. And these communications between yourself and Mr. Harlow, the court, would be interested in your explanation. The color drained from Vanessa's face. Those were private conversations illegally obtained. They were retrieved by a licensed investigator from a discarded device following all proper legal protocols, the judge replied. They are admissible, and frankly, they're illuminating. I watched Michael's expression change as the judge referenced communications he clearly hadn't seen. His shoulders curved inward as though physically bearing the weight of betrayal. "Your Honor," Vanessa's attorney interjected, "these isolated communications fail to provide context for what was clearly hyperbole during a difficult period." The judge cut him off with a raised hand. "I've reviewed sufficient evidence to form preliminary conclusions. Before rendering my decision, I would like to hear from one more witness." She paused, looking directly at Vanessa. "The court calls Aaron Caldwell." Aaron entered from a side door, escorted by a court aide. He wore his school uniform, his striped tie slightly askew. In one hand, he clutched the teddy bear Henry had given him years before. Seeing him so small against the imposing backdrop of legal authority sent a wave of protective instinct through me. The judge's tone softened. "Hello, Aaron. I know this is a little scary, but I just want to ask you some questions about your life at home. Is that okay?" Aaron nodded, sandy hair falling across his forehead. He spotted me and waved quickly before remembering where he was folding his hands in his lap. "Can you tell me what it's like at home? What does a normal day look like for you?" Aaron considered the question with the seriousness children reserve for adults who treat them with respect. "Sometimes Mommy forgets to pick me up from school. I wait on the bench until Grandma comes. Grandma always comes." The simple statement carried more weight than hours of testimony. Vanessa stiffened visibly. "I have asthma," Aaron continued. "Grandma remembers my inhaler. She puts it in my backpack every day. Mommy forgets sometimes." He paused, his small fingers tracing the worn fur of his teddy bear. "One time I couldn't breathe good at school, but the nurse called Grandma and she came right away." The judge made notes, her pen moving deliberately across the page. "Tell me about weekends, Aaron. What do you usually do?" "Grandma makes pancakes on Saturdays. Grandpa used to do it, but now Grandma does. Mommy doesn't cook breakfast. She says she's too busy." He looked around the courtroom, suddenly hesitant. "Sometimes she goes on trips. She shows me pictures of beaches and big buildings." "Has your mother talked to you about moving somewhere?" the judge asked gently. Aaron nodded, his expression serious. "She says we might move to Arizona. It's sunny there and they have pools, but—" He glanced at me, then at his father. "I told her I don't want to go. I like my school and my friends, and I want to stay with Daddy and Grandma." Michael's face crumpled, the full impact of what his son was saying, finally penetrating the defensive walls he'd built. "One more question, Aaron," the judge said. "If you could choose where to live right now, where would that be?" Without hesitation, Aaron pointed toward me. "With Grandma. She has my favorite books, and she helps with my homework, and she never yells when I spill things." He looked at his father. "And Daddy could live there too. There's an extra room. Grandma said so." The simplicity of his answer, untainted by adult calculation, hung in the air like a bell tone, clear, resonant, true. "Thank you, Aaron," the judge said warmly. "You've been very brave today." As Aaron was escorted from the courtroom, I glimpsed Vanessa's face. Behind the carefully applied makeup, I saw something I had never witnessed before: fear. Not anger, not calculation, but genuine fear, as she realized her performance had been shattered by a child's unvarnished truth. The judge reviewed her notes, the courtroom silent, except for the soft sound of papers being turned. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority of decision reached. "Based on the evidence presented today, I am prepared to make a preliminary ruling. The will of Henry Caldwell shall remain in force as written. Clara Caldwell will retain control of all properties and assets as stipulated." She paused, her gaze moving between Vanessa and me. "Furthermore, I am granting temporary custody of Aaron Caldwell to his grandmother, Clara Caldwell, with supervised visitation for Vanessa Caldwell pending final custody determination." The gavel struck, the sound echoing like thunder. Vanessa shot to her feet. "This is a sham. You're ruining my life." She turned to Michael, grabbing his arm with desperate force. "Say something. Don't just sit there." Michael pulled away, his voice broken but clear. "You lied to me. You lied about everything." His simple statement carried the weight of every deception, every manipulation he had endured. Vanessa's mask crumbled entirely. "You're pathetic, just like your father. I could have made something of this family, something more than rental houses and boring stability." Richard Harlow reappeared at the courtroom door, gesturing for her to follow. Seeing him ready to leave triggered something in Michael. He stood suddenly addressing Richard directly for the first time. "You planned this from the beginning, didn't you? Both of you targeting my family's assets while my father was dying." Richard's smooth composure faltered momentarily. He straightened his tie, a nervous gesture revealing more than words. "This was a business opportunity that became complicated by personal matters. I suggest we all move forward separately." "A business opportunity?" Michael repeated the words bitter on his tongue. "My son was a complication in your business plan." Vanessa grabbed her purse. "This isn't over, Clara." She swept down the aisle heels, striking the floor like exclamation points. Richard guided her out, his hand at her elbow, already distancing himself physically from her outburst. I had seen enough men like Richard Harlow to recognize when they were calculating their exit strategy. The courtroom emptied, leaving Michael slumped in his chair. I approached cautiously, uncertain whether he wanted comfort or space. He looked up, eyes red-rimmed but clear. "Mom?" His voice cracked. "I didn't see what was happening. I couldn't believe she would—" I sat beside him, not touching, just present. "Your father knew," I said softly. "Not to hurt you, but to protect you and Aaron until you could see for yourself." Michael nodded slowly, understanding dawning through pain. "That's why he left me his tools and books. He knew everything else would become ammunition." "He trusted you would find your way back to what matters," I confirmed. "He knew who you really are beneath the confusion she created." Michael looked around the empty courtroom, as if seeing clearly for the first time the battlefield his life had become. "What happens now?" I thought of Aaron waiting outside with the court aide of the empty bedroom at my house that had gradually accumulated his toys and books of the workshop where Michael had begun reconnecting with his father's legacy. "Now we rebuild," I told him, "one day at a time." The weeks following the hearing unfolded in careful recalibration. With Dalton's guidance, we established a legal structure that would protect the properties and Aaron's future while giving Michael time to regain his footing. We created an educational trust for Aaron, ensuring that regardless of what happened with Vanessa, his schooling would be secure. We transferred management responsibilities for 2 of the rental properties to Michael, allowing him to learn the business his father had built while earning an income independent of Vanessa. Each legal document, each financial arrangement felt like laying another brick in the foundation Henry had started. Not just protecting assets, but creating stability that could weather whatever storms might still come. Aaron settled into my home with the resilience of children. I registered him at the school nearest my house, arranged for his asthma specialist to transfer records, established routines that provided the stability children crave, especially those whose worlds have been shaken. "Grandma," he asked one evening as I tucked him into bed, "is Mommy coming back?" The question caught me unprepared. I sat on the edge of his bed, choosing words carefully. "I don't know, sweetheart. Your mom is making some choices right now about what she wants for her life." He nodded, his expression serious beyond his years. "It's okay if she doesn't. I like it here with you." The simple acceptance broke my heart and healed it simultaneously. Children adapt, survive, find stability where it's offered. Aaron had simply transferred his trust to where it was honored. Michael found an apartment in one of our rental properties, a small garden unit where he could maintain independence while staying close. He began spending evenings in Henry's workshop behind the garage, completing unfinished projects, learning skills his father had tried to teach him years before. The sound of his sanding and measuring drifted through the backyard, a rhythm of healing. One evening I brought him coffee, watching from the doorway, as he worked on a small wooden jewelry box Henry had started before his death. "Dad tried to teach me this when I was younger," Michael said without looking up, his hands moving steadily across the wood. "I wasn't interested then. I thought there were more important things than knowing how to fit pieces together properly." The metaphor wasn't lost on either of us. He had been assembling his life with Vanessa without checking if the pieces truly fit, without ensuring the foundation was level. "He knew you'd understand eventually," I told him. "Some lessons can't be rushed." Michael nodded, testing the fit of a small drawer, making minute adjustments with a file. "I keep thinking about what I didn't see, the signs that were right in front of me." "Love makes us selective in what we choose to see," I said. Your father understood that. It's why he protected you the way he did." Michael set down his tools, finally meeting my eyes. "How did you know, with Vanessa, I mean? How did you see what I couldn't?" I considered the question, thinking back to those first observations at the hospital at the funeral. I wasn't blinded by love for her. I was looking with different eyes. I paused. And perhaps I recognized something in her that I've seen before, the calculation beneath charm, the performance replacing genuine emotion. It was the closest we had come to discussing Vanessa directly since the hearing. Michael returned to his sanding processing in silence. Finally, he said, "I want to learn how to see more clearly, for Aaron's sake, and for mine." It was a beginning, the acknowledgement that clarity required effort, that discernment was a skill to be developed, not an instinct automatically granted. Henry would have been proud. Vanessa moved out of the family home within days of the hearing, taking only personal belongings, leaving without saying goodbye to Aaron. She filed for divorce immediately, demanding financial settlements that the courts, armed with evidence of her plans and behavior, largely denied. Richard Harlow's interest in her waned as quickly as it had bloomed once her access to property and capital evaporated. Through Dalton's connections, we learned she had moved to Arizona alone, her promises of wealth and excitement dissolving like mirages in the desert heat. The final custody hearing came 6 months after the initial ruling. Vanessa appeared without Richard, wearing a subdued suit, instead of her usual dramatic attire, presenting herself as a mother who had made mistakes but deserved another chance. "Your Honor," she said, her voice carefully modulated to project regret, "I've completed parenting classes as directed by the court. I've established a stable home in Phoenix. I'm asking for joint custody of my son, with physical custody divided between Arizona and here." The judge reviewed Vanessa's visitation record. "Mrs. Caldwell, you've attended only 2 of 12 scheduled supervised visits with Aaron in the past 6 months. Your parenting class attendance was sporadic at best. What assurance can you provide that your interest in your son isn't simply an extension of your interest in the financial arrangements surrounding him?" Vanessa's mask slipped momentarily, irritation flashing across her features before she composed herself. "I've been establishing a new life, Your Honor. A stable environment where Aaron would have opportunities beyond what's available here." The judge's expression remained impassive. "The evidence before me suggests that Aaron already has a stable environment with his grandmother and father's active participation. The consistency of care, educational progress, and emotional well-being documented by his therapist all indicate he's thriving in his current situation." The ruling, when it came, was clear and unequivocal. Primary custody of Aaron Caldwell is awarded to Clara Caldwell, with Michael Caldwell sharing guardianship responsibilities. Vanessa Caldwell is granted supervised visitation, twice monthly, contingent upon consistent participation. Vanessa's face remained impassive throughout, a new mask replacing the one that had failed her. She did not fight the decision, did not rage against its finality. She simply gathered her belongings and left the courtroom without looking back at the son she had been willing to discard. Her absence became another form of abandonment, but one that opened space for healing rather than inflicting new wounds. Time passed not in dramatic leaps, but in the steady accumulation of ordinary days. Seasons changed. Holidays came and went, marking our progress in small traditions, reclaimed or newly established. Aaron grew taller, his voice deepening his personality, emerging more confidently as the fear of displacement faded. Michael found his footing professionally, taking over full management of the rental properties, bringing engineering skills he'd inherited from his father to improve and update the buildings. He moved from the apartment to a small house near mine, close enough for Aaron to move easily between our homes, establishing a new family geography based on connection rather than separation. Vanessa's supervised visits grew increasingly sporadic until they stopped altogether. She sent occasional gifts on Aaron's birthday, impersonal items that revealed how little she knew about his developing interests. Aaron accepted them with the pragmatic resilience of children, neither dwelling on their emptiness nor rejecting the gesture entirely. 3 years passed in this quiet reconstruction. What had been broken was mended differently, not returning to what was, but building something new from the fragments, something perhaps stronger for having been tested. One spring evening, I sat in the front row of Aaron's school auditorium. The lights dimmed, the hum of conversation faded, and the heavy velvet curtain trembled before rising. Aaron stood center stage in the spotlight, no longer the frightened 8-year-old clutching a teddy bear in court, but a poised 11-year-old playing the lead in the spring production. His voice carried clearly through the auditorium, confident, drawing the audience into the story. I watched him transform through the magic of performance, becoming someone else, while somehow more fully himself. Beside me, Michael leaned forward, pride illuminating his face as he watched his son. When the final curtain fell and the applause subsided, Aaron rushed to meet us in the lobby, still in costume script clutched in one hand. "Grandma, did you like it?" I nodded, unable to speak past emotion. He pressed the script into my hands, eager to share his triumph more tangibly. I opened the cover and found a note written in his improving handwriting, "Grandma, I love you." The simplicity of it stopped my breath. In that moment, I wasn't standing in a school hallway surrounded by proud parents and excited children. I was in my kitchen years ago, finding one of Henry's notes on the counter, "Clara, I love you," scrawled in his familiar hand. The circle had closed. From Henry's ink-stained declarations to Aaron's penciled affirmation, love had carried us through storms and anchored us in the aftermath. I pressed the script to my chest, overwhelmed by the echo of past and present intertwining. Aaron tilted his head, studying my face. "Grandma, are you crying?" I laughed softly, brushing away tears. "Just a little, but they're good tears." That night, after Aaron had gone to bed, I sat in my armchair with Henry's coat draped over the arm. Its wool had worn thin in places, the scent of him long faded, but its presence remained a comfort, a connection to the man whose foresight had preserved our family's future. Michael sat across from me, nursing a cup of coffee. He had found his way back to himself, reclaiming the thoughtful nature and steady hands that were his inheritance from Henry. "I don't think I ever properly thanked you, Mom," he said quietly, "for holding everything together when I couldn't see what was happening." I shook my head. "Your father knew you would find your way back. He trusted you even when you couldn't trust yourself. Dad would be proud of him." Michael nodded toward the stairs where Aaron had disappeared. "Of all of us." "Yes," I agreed, "he would." We sat in companionable silence, the house settling around us. Through the window, stars punctured the darkness, constant and reassuring. I thought about the journey we had traveled since that phone call at 2:03 a.m. The grief, the betrayal, the patient gathering of evidence, the final vindication of truth. "I used to believe silence was weakness," I said, "that not speaking, not fighting back loudly meant surrender. But I've learned that silence, when chosen with strength, is power. Henry taught me that." Michael considered this, turning the concept over in his mind, the way he examined wood grain in the workshop, looking for patterns and meaning. "Some battles aren't won with noise," he agreed. "Sometimes the quietest person in the room holds the most truth." The observation carried echoes of Henry's wisdom, proof that his legacy lived on not just in property and possessions, but in values transmitted through generations. As midnight approached, Michael gathered his things to return to his house. At the door he paused. "Do you think Vanessa ever loved us? Even for a little while?" The vulnerability in his voice transported me back decades, to the little boy who had asked me why the sky was blue, why people had to die, why some hearts could hold so much love while others remained closed. I considered my answer carefully, honoring both his need for truth and his capacity to bear it. "I think she loved what she thought you could give her," I said finally. "But love isn't about what you can take. It's about what you choose to give, even when it costs you something. Your father understood that, and so do you." He nodded, absorbing this without bitterness. "Good night, Mom. See you tomorrow?" After he left, I moved through the darkened house, checking locks and windows in the security ritual that had become habit. I paused at Aaron's door, watching the rise and fall of his breathing, peaceful in sleep. The nightlight cast soft shadows across his face, no longer round with childhood, but beginning to show the structure of the young man he would become. In the quiet of my bedroom, I carefully hung Henry's coat in the closet, rather than draping it across the empty side of the bed, as I had for so long after his death. Not abandoning his memory, but integrating it differently, acknowledging that love remains even as its expression evolves. As I drifted toward sleep, I felt a sense of completion. Henry had trusted me to guard what mattered to protect our family with the patient strength he had always seen in me. In doing so, I had discovered my own capacity for steadfastness, for standing firm when others expected surrender. The true victory wasn't in Vanessa's defeat or in maintaining control of properties and assets. It was in the preservation of connections, the protection of innocence, the patient nurturing of what Henry had valued most, our family bound not by legal documents, but by choice and commitment by pancakes on Saturday mornings, and notes saying simply, "I love you." In a world that often equates strength with volume, that mistakes aggression for power, I had discovered the quiet force of patience, the formidable authority of silence, chosen deliberately rather than imposed by others. Sometimes the strongest position is simply standing still while storms rage around you, holding fast to truth until justice finally aligns with reality. The battle was over. The healing continued. And the legacy Henry entrusted to me lived on not just in properties and possessions, but in the values that had guided us through our darkest hours: integrity, perseverance, and the quiet courage to stand firm when others expected surrender. These were the true inheritance he had left us, more valuable than any material assets, and these would endure long after buildings crumbled and investments faded. The phone had rung at 2:03 a.m. and changed everything, but it did not define everything. What defined us in the end was not what happened to us, but how we responded with focus rather than fury, with vigilance rather than vengeance, with the quiet, patient strength that ultimately proves more powerful than any storm.